I still remember his face. The face of a child who everyone ignored. The face that would later shock an entire school. But what happened that day wasn't just about sports or talent. It was about something much more powerful that we often forget exists in this world. He was always the last one picked. Always standing there, shoulders slumped, eyes fixed on the ground as team captains chose everyone else before him. But what happened next left an entire gymnasium in tears, the coach speechless, and changed the lives of everyone who witnessed it. This is the story of courage that appeared in the most unexpected place. Nobody saw it coming. Not the teachers, not the other students, and certainly not the coach who had written him off years ago. Sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from those we least expect, and this story proves exactly that. David Parker, 12 years old, asthmatic, awkward, and painfully shy. River Creek Middle School in Westfield, Massachusetts was filled with the usual middle school chaos. While all the popular kids were showing off their athletic skills and social status, David was just trying to survive another day of being invisible. The sound of sneakers squeaking against the polished gym floor echoed throughout the space. The smell of floor wax and sweat hung in the air, that unmistakable gymnasium scent that brings back memories for all of us. Coach Phillips stood in the center with his clipboard and whistle, his presence commanding attention without him having to say a word. "All right, everyone, line up. We're choosing teams for the basketball tournament today," Coach Phillips announced, his voice booming across the gymnasium. The students quickly gathered, excitement buzzing through the air. Everyone except David, who moved slowly, deliberately, knowing exactly what was about to happen. It was the same routine every gym class. 2 team captains, usually the school's star athletes, would stand in front of everyone and take turns selecting their team. And every time, without fail, David would be the last one chosen, if not directly assigned to a team by an exasperated coach. Today's captains were Tyler Williams and Jake Foster, both 8th grade basketball players who were already being scouted by high school coaches. Tyler went first. "I choose Marcus." No surprise there. Marcus high-fived Tyler as he jogged over to stand beside him. Jake scanned the line. "Emma," he said with confidence. Emma, track team star, smiled as she joined Jake's side. One by one, names were called. With each selection, the line of students grew smaller, and the knot in David's stomach grew tighter. But today, something was different. There was another boy standing next to David as the final picks approached. Michael Chen, a new student who had transferred to River Creek just last week. Michael was smaller than most boys his age. His glasses seemed too big for his face, and he stood with the same hunched posture that David had perfected over years of trying to make himself invisible. David glanced at Michael and saw something familiar in his eyes. The same dread, the same anticipation of rejection that David had felt countless times before. Only 3 students remained now: David, Michael, and Jesse, who was on crutches due to a soccer injury but was still there participating. Tyler looked at the remaining 3 with barely concealed disappointment. "Jesse," he called out. Even with crutches, Jesse was chosen before David and Michael. Now it was just the 2 of them. David had accepted his fate long ago, but seeing Michael's face, the new kid who probably still had hope that things would be different at this school, something shifted inside him. A quiet rage began to build, not for himself, but for Michael. "I'll take ... double quotes." Jake paused, looking between David and Michael, making a show of his deliberation though everyone knew who he would pick. The gym had gone quiet. 20 pairs of eyes watched, some with sympathy, others with cruel amusement. "I'll take David, I guess," Jake finally said, the reluctance clear in his voice. And there it was. Michael, the new kid, left standing alone. Coach Phillips sighed audibly. "All right, Michael, you'll go with Tyler's team to even things out." The tension grew. The air in the gym became heavier. Tyler's protest came instantly. "But coach, that's not fair. Why do we have to take him? We picked our team fair and square." The coach's frustration was evident. "Life isn't fair, Tyler. Just take Michael and let's start the game." Michael walked slowly toward Tyler's team, his eyes never leaving the floor. The other team members stepped back slightly as he approached, creating a small but unmistakable circle of exclusion around him. But what happened next wasn't part of the usual script. "Wait," David's voice rang out, surprisingly clear and strong for someone who rarely spoke above a whisper. The entire gym froze. David Parker was talking, voluntarily, in public. "I'll switch with Michael," he continued, his voice growing steadier with each word. "Jake doesn't want me on his team anyway. I heard him groan when he had to pick me." Coach Phillips looked confused. "David, that's not how this works. The teams have been chosen." "Then I'm not playing," David said, still standing in his spot, not moving toward Jake's team. "It's not right. You all do this every time, every single time. And we just stand here and take it because what choice do we have?" The silence in the gym was deafening. Even the usual background noise of the ventilation system seemed to have paused to listen. "David, go to your team now, or you'll be sitting out and getting a 0 for today's participation," Coach Phillips warned, his patience wearing thin. What no one expected was David's response. "Fine, I'll take the 0. He walked over to the bleachers and sat down, arms crossed over his chest. The coach's face reddened. "Parker, get back in line right now." But David didn't move. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst through his chest, and his hands were trembling, but he remained seated. And then something even more unexpected happened. Michael, who hadn't said a word since arriving at the school, walked over and sat down next to David. "I'll take a 0 too," he said quietly. The coach was speechless. 2 students were openly defying him, disrupting his carefully planned class. "Both of you, principal's office. Now." But before either of them could stand, another voice spoke up. "I'll sit out too." It was Jessie, hobbling over on her crutches to join them on the bleachers. "This picking teams thing is awful, and everyone knows it." The tension in the room was palpable. Coach Phillips stood stunned as a murmur rippled through the remaining students. Then, slowly, another student broke ranks and walked toward the bleachers, and another. Within minutes, half the class was sitting in silent protest. The coach's whistle hung unused around his neck as he struggled to process what was happening. His gym class had just staged a spontaneous revolt, led by the most unlikely revolutionary, David Parker, the kid who never spoke up, who never caused trouble, who was always just trying to disappear. "What exactly do you think this will accomplish?" Coach Phillips finally asked, his voice unnaturally quiet. David looked up, meeting the coach's eyes directly for perhaps the first time. "Maybe nothing," he admitted. "But at least we're not pretending this is okay anymore." The gym remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Then Coach Phillips did something no one expected. He pulled up a chair, sat down facing the seated students, and asked, "What would you suggest instead?" David hesitated. He hadn't thought this far ahead. His protest had been instinctive, born from years of accumulated humiliation and the fresh pain of seeing it happen to someone else. I don't know. Something different. Something where kids don't have to feel worthless." Coach Phillips nodded slowly. "All right then. Class dismissed for today. Tomorrow, I want each of you to come with one suggestion for how we could form teams differently. We'll put it to a vote." As the students filed out, David remained seated, still processing what had just happened. He had stood up to a teacher, something he'd never imagined doing, and instead of being punished, he'd been heard. Michael sat beside him, neither of them speaking for a moment. Finally, Michael turned to him. "Thanks," he said simply. "No one's ever done anything like that for me before." David shrugged, embarrassed by the attention. "It wasn't just for you," he admitted. "It was for me too, and for everyone who's ever had to stand in that line, feeling like they don't matter." The next day, David arrived at gym class with a knot in his stomach. Would Coach Phillips have changed his mind? Would there be consequences for yesterday's disruption? As students filed in, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. To everyone's surprise, Coach Phillips had a stack of papers in his hand and a thoughtfully serious expression on his face. "Before we begin today, I want to say something," he announced once everyone had gathered. "I've been teaching physical education for 15 years. In that time, I've always done things a certain way, because that's how they were done when I was in school. Yesterday made me realize that doesn't make it right." The gym was silent, every student hanging on his words. I spent last night thinking about what happened and reading some research on physical education practices. I also read through your suggestions, which were surprisingly thoughtful. He cleared his throat. Starting today, we're implementing a new system for team selection. The coach explained his new approach. Teams would be pre-assigned and rotated regularly throughout the semester, ensuring everyone had the chance to play with different classmates. The focus would shift from competition to cooperation, with team success measured not just by winning, but by how well they work together and improve. And one more thing, Coach Phillips added, looking directly at David. I've decided that our class will compete in the intramural basketball tournament next month. Confused murmurs spread through the group. The intramural tournament was usually reserved for the most athletic students, handpicked by coaches. But, Coach Phillips continued, we're going to do it differently. Every single student in this class will participate. Every one of you will have playing time. It's not about winning. It's about showing that physical education is for everyone. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Excitement from some, apprehension from others, and outright panic from students like David, who had never imagined themselves participating in a competitive sporting event. As class ended, Coach Phillips called David aside. What you did yesterday took guts, Parker. Real guts. He hesitated, then added, I was a lot like you at your age. Always the last one picked, always feeling like I didn't belong in the gym. That's why I became a PE teacher. I wanted to make it better. He sighed deeply. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. David didn't know how to respond to this unexpected confession. I'm not good at basketball, he finally said, feeling he should warn the coach before the tournament. Coach Phillips smiled. The tournament isn't for another month. A lot can change in a month, especially when someone's finally given a chance to try. Over the next few weeks, something remarkable began to happen. During practice sessions for the tournament, Coach Phillips focused on fundamentals and teamwork, rather than highlighting individual talent. Students who had never shown interest in sports before began to improve, gaining confidence with each small success. David, who had always used his asthma as an excuse to minimize his participation, found that with proper pacing and technique, he could play longer than he'd ever thought possible. He wasn't becoming a star athlete overnight, but for the first time he wasn't defined by what he couldn't do. Michael, too, was blossoming under this new approach. Though small, he was quick and had surprisingly good hand-eye coordination. Coach Phillips positioned him as a point guard, teaching him how to analyze the court and make strategic passes. But the most surprising transformation wasn't in their athletic abilities, it was in the classroom dynamics. The rigid social hierarchy that had dominated their interactions began to shift. Students who had never spoken to each other were now strategizing together, encouraging each other, forming connections that extended beyond the gymnasium. Not everyone embraced the change. Tyler and some of the other athletic students were initially resentful, feeling that their natural talents were being devalued. This is stupid, Tyler complained loudly during one practice. Why are we wasting time teaching people who can't play? We're going to get crushed in the tournament. Coach Phillips overheard the comment. Rather than reprimanding Tyler, he pulled him aside for a private conversation. No one heard what was said, but afterward, Tyler approached David and grudgingly offered to help him practice his shooting technique during lunch break. The day of the tournament arrived with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. River Creek Middle School's gymnasium was filled with students, teachers, and parents from various schools in the district. The competition was organized by grade level, with River Creek's 8th grade class scheduled to play against Westbrook Middle School, a school known for its strong athletic program. As both teams warmed up, the contrast was stark. Westbrook's players moved with confidence and practiced complex drills. River Creek's team, the entire 8th grade gym class, displayed varying levels of ability, but wore matching expressions of nervous determination. In the locker room before the game, Coach Phillips gathered his unusual team. Today isn't about winning, he reminded them. It's about showing up, doing your best, and supporting each other. Every one of you has improved over the past month, and that's already a victory. The game began predictably enough. Westbrook took an early lead, their well-practiced plays easily outmaneuvering River Creek's less experienced players. By halftime, They were ahead by 15 points, and the discouragement was visible on many faces in the River Creek team. In the locker room, David sat quietly, trying to control his breathing. He hadn't played much in the first half, just a few minutes before his asthma forced him to the bench. Coach Phillips approached him. "You doing okay, Parker?" David nodded, though he felt far from okay. He felt like he had failed, like his body had betrayed him when it mattered most. "I'm sorry I couldn't stay in longer," he mumbled. "You played exactly as long as you could, and that's all anyone can ask," the coach replied. Then, surprising David, he added, "I'd like you to start the second half." David's head snapped up. "What? But I'm not. This isn't just about basketball skills," Coach Phillips cut in. "This team needs something else right now, something I think you can provide." David wanted to protest further, but there was something in the coach's expression that stopped him. Trust. Coach Phillips was trusting him with something important, even though there was no logical reason to do so. As the second half began, David found himself on the court alongside Michael, Jessie, who had recovered from her injury, Tyler and Emma. Westbrook's players looked confident, almost bored, clearly expecting an easy victory. The ball was in play, and immediately Westbrook took possession. Their point guard dribbled skillfully down the court, easily evading Tyler's defense. But then, unexpectedly, Michael stepped in, his small stature allowing him to duck under the dribble and tap the ball away. The crowd gasped. Emma recovered the ball and passed it to David, who stood frozen for a moment, unused to being part of the action. "Move, David," Jessie shouted, and instinctively David dribbled forward, his heart racing. A Westbrook defender approached, and David, having no idea what to do, passed the ball hastily to Tyler. Tyler, now in possession but closely guarded, looked for an opening. In previous games, he would have attempted to score himself, regardless of the defense. But something had changed. He spotted David, who had moved to an open position near the basket, and made a clean pass. David caught the ball, surprised to find himself unguarded. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow down. He was aware of the crowd's anticipation, of Coach Phillips watching intently from the sideline, of Michael giving him an encouraging nod. With a deep breath, David jumped and shot. The ball arced through the air, everyone's eyes following its trajectory. It hit the backboard, circled the rim once, twice, and fell in. The River Creek side of the gymnasium erupted in cheers. It was just 2 points in a game where they were still losing by 13, but somehow it felt like more. It felt like a victory already. That basket didn't magically transform the game. Westbrook still maintained their lead, their superior training evident in every play. But something had shifted in the River Creek team. They began playing with more heart, more unity. Each student, regardless of ability, contributed in whatever way they could. Michael's speed and unexpected defensive skills forced several turnovers. Jessie, with her soccer background, showed remarkable footwork. Even the students who had been the most reluctant participants found moments to shine. A well-timed pass, an unexpected rebound, a moment of defensive pressure that disrupted Westbrook's rhythm. And David, despite having to take frequent breaks for his asthma, returned to the game again and again, each time with renewed determination. He scored only 4 points total, but his presence on the court seemed to remind everyone why they were there. Not just to win, but to prove that everyone deserved a chance to play. The final score was 68-57, with Westbrook maintaining their lead to the end. By conventional standards, River Creek had lost, but as both teams lined up to shake hands, there was no sense of defeat among the River Creek players. They had accomplished something more important than winning a middle school basketball game. As the gymnasium cleared out, Coach Phillips gathered his team one last time. "I've coached teams that won championships," he told them, his voice unusually emotional. "But I've never been prouder of any team than I am of you today. You showed everyone what physical education should really be about." The following Monday, something unexpected happened. As students entered the school, they found the trophy case in the main hallway had been rearranged. The center position, usually reserved for championship trophies, now held a simple framed photograph. The entire 8th grade gym class in their basketball uniform, arms linked, expressions ranging from shy smiles to exuberant grins. Beneath it, a small plaque read, River Creek Middle School 8th Grade, Courage and Unity Award. No one knew exactly who had arranged this display, though rumors suggested it was Coach Phillips with the principal's blessing, but its impact was immediate and profound. Students paused to look at it throughout the day, pointing and smiling when they found themselves in the photo. For David, the change went beyond a photo in a trophy case. In the weeks that followed, he noticed subtle but significant shifts in how he experienced school. Students who had never acknowledged him before now nodded in the hallways or included him in conversations. His confidence, bolstered by this new visibility, enabled him to raise his hand more in class. Join the science club he'd always been interested in, but too intimidated to approach, and even helped Michael start a lunch group for new students. The most surprising development came 2 months after the tournament, when Coach Phillips approached David with an unusual offer. "I'm starting an assistant coaching program," he explained. "I'd like students to help me redesign the physical education curriculum to be more inclusive. Given your perspective and what you've shown me about courage, I'd like you to be one of the first assistants." David's immediate instinct was to decline. Him, helping to design pay curriculum. It seemed absurd. But then he remembered the feeling of sitting on those bleachers, speaking up for the first time, and the unexpected changes that had followed. "Okay," he said simply. "I'll do it." That spring, River Creek Middle School implemented a new physical education program. Team sports remained a component, but they were balanced with cooperative activities, individual skill development, and alternative options that appealed to different interests and abilities. Student assistant coaches like David helped identify when someone was struggling and suggested modifications to make activities more accessible. The final event of the school year was an all-school field day, organized collaboratively by teachers and student assistants. Unlike traditional field days that emphasized competition and athletic prowess, this one offered a variety of stations that celebrated different types of movement and play. There were standard races and ball games, but also yoga sessions, dance competitions, obstacle courses designed for teamwork rather than speed, and even a section dedicated to playground games from around the world. As David helped organize the event, he caught sight of Michael across the field, confidently explaining the rules of a Chinese jumping game to a group of interested 6th graders. Their eyes met briefly, and they exchanged smiles of recognition, not just of each other, but of how far they had both come since that day in the gymnasium. The day was concluding when Coach Phillips found David taking a momentary break in the shade. "So, Parker," he said, sitting down beside him, "what do you think? Better than standing in line waiting to be picked last?" David smiled. "Definitely better." The coach nodded, looking out at the field where students of all grades, abilities, and social groups were engaged in various activities. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "in 15 years of teaching, I've had students win state championships, earn athletic scholarships, become professional athletes. But what you did that day, standing up not just for yourself but for others, having the courage to challenge a system that wasn't working, that might be the most important moment I've witnessed in my career." David felt his face flush with embarrassment, still uncomfortable with direct praise. "I was just tired of feeling worthless," he admitted. "That's exactly it, though," Coach Phillips replied. "No child should ever feel worthless in school, especially not in my gym." He paused, then added, "Sometimes the most important lessons we teach have nothing to do with the subject we're hired to cover." As the afternoon drew to a close, students gathered for a final assembly. The principal spoke briefly about the success of the new field day format and thanked everyone involved in its organization. Then, unexpectedly, he called David to the stage. With reluctant steps, David approached the microphone, his heart hammering in his chest. Public speaking remained his greatest fear, despite his newfound confidence in other areas. But as he looked out at the sea of faces, at Michael giving him a thumbs up from the front row, at Jesse and Emma smiling encouragingly, even at Tyler nodding in respectful acknowledgement, he found his voice. 6 months ago, he began, his words coming out stronger than he expected. I was the kid no one wanted on their team, The kid who spent every gym class hoping to become invisible. He paused, taking a deep breath. I know I'm not the only one who felt that way. School can be really hard when you don't fit in, when you're not good at the things everyone seems to value. The auditorium was completely silent, hundreds of students listening intently to a boy who, half a year earlier, rarely spoke above a whisper. But I learned something important, David continued. Sometimes it just takes one person to stand up and say, this isn't right, to start a change. And sometimes the person who needs to stand up is you, even if your voice shakes, even if you're scared, even if you're not sure what will happen next. As he stepped back from the microphone to unexpected applause, David caught Coach Phillips' eye. The coach was smiling, but there was something else in his expression too, a mixture of pride and something that looked almost like awe. Later, as students were filing out for the summer break, Coach Phillips handed David an envelope. Something for you to think about over the vacation, he said. David opened it after he got home. Inside was an application for a county-wide youth leadership program, along with a personal recommendation letter from Coach Phillips. The letter described not just what David had done, but who he was: observant, compassionate, quietly determined, and possessed of what the coach called transformative courage. David read the letter twice, amazed at how Coach Phillips seemed to see qualities in him that he was only beginning to recognize in himself. He thought back to that day in the gym, to the moment when something inside him had finally said, enough, when standing up for Michael had somehow also meant standing up for himself. He had gone from being the invisible kid to someone who had helped change an entire school culture, not through exceptional talent or extraordinary intelligence, but simply by finding the courage to speak a truth that needed to be heard. As he carefully folded the application and placed it on his desk, David made a silent promise to himself to remember what it felt like to be unseen, to use his new visibility to make space for others who still felt invisible, and to never underestimate the power of one quiet voice speaking up for what is right. That fall, when David entered 9th grade at Westfield High School, he carried with him not just the memory of that transformative 8th grade year, but also a deeper understanding of his own capacity for courage and change. The lessons he had learned wouldn't prevent all future challenges. High school would bring its own complex social dynamics and difficult moments, but he faced them with a confidence he could never have imagined before that day. He decided to sit on the bleachers in silent protest. And somewhere in River Creek Middle School, in a 7th grade gym class, a new physical education teacher was explaining to his students that in this gymnasium, everyone belonged, everyone participated, and everyone mattered. The old system of team captains picking their classmates one by one until someone was left standing alone was gone, replaced by something more inclusive, more supportive, and ultimately, more educational. If you happen to visit that middle school and look at the trophy case in the main hallway, you might notice something unusual. Alongside the championship cups and medals, there remains a simple framed photograph of an 8th grade class in basketball uniform. Most visitors wouldn't know its significance, wouldn't recognize it as the beginning of a small revolution in how one school approached physical education. But for the students who were there that day, who witnessed a quiet boy finally finding his voice, who participated in a game that redefined what victory truly means, that photograph represents something profound. It stands as a reminder that courage doesn't always roar, that meaningful change often begins with a single, seemingly small act of defiance, and that sometimes the most important lessons learned in school have nothing to do with the official curriculum. In the years since that memorable basketball game, many things have changed at River Creek Middle School. New students have come, older ones have graduated, faculty members have retired or moved on to other positions. But one thing remains constant: the story of David Parker, the boy who was always picked last until the day he refused to play by those rules anymore. It's become something of a legend, retold at the beginning of each school year as a reminder of the values the school now strives to embody. David himself returns occasionally, volunteering with the youth leadership program he joined after Coach Phillips' recommendation. He works with middle schoolers struggling to find their place, sharing his story not as some grand heroic tale, but but as simple evidence that even the quietest voice can spark meaningful change. And sometimes, when he visits, he stops by the gymnasium during a PE class. There, he watches students engaged in activities designed for inclusion, rather than elimination, for cooperation alongside competition. He sees children of varying abilities participating fully, their contributions valued regardless of their athletic prowess. In those moments, observing from the same bleachers where he once staged his quiet protest, David is reminded that courage comes in many forms. There is the loud, obvious courage of confrontation and grand gestures, but there is also the quieter courage of persistence, of showing up day after day in spaces where you've been made to feel you don't belong. And perhaps most powerful of all, there is the courage of standing up not just for yourself, but for others who have been similarly marginalized. It's this last type of courage that transformed a middle school gymnasium from a place of weekly humiliation for some students into a space where everyone had the opportunity to discover what their bodies could do, to experience the joy of movement without the shadow of judgment, to belong. If you ask David now what he learned from that experience, he'll tell you it wasn't primarily about basketball or sports or physical education policy. It was about the ripple effects of a single act of courage, about how systems only continue to cause harm when everyone silently accepts them as inevitable, and about how sometimes the most powerful words in any language are simply, "This isn't right." He'll tell you that before that day in the gym, he had seen himself solely as a victim of an unfair system. After, he began to recognize his potential as an agent of change. That shift in perspective, from passive recipient to active participant in shaping his environment, altered the trajectory of his life in ways he's still discovering. And he'll tell you that whenever he faces a situation that seems insurmountable, whenever he's tempted to remain silent in the face of injustice because that's just how things are, he remembers a trembling but determined 7th grade boy walking to the bleachers instead of to the team that didn't want him. He remembers the surprise on Coach Phillips' face, the quiet solidarity of Michael sitting beside him, the unexpected courage it inspired in others. He remembers, and he finds his voice again. As for Coach Phillips, he still teaches at River Creek Middle School, though he's now the department head for physical education. The program he developed following that fateful basketball game has become a model for other schools in the district, and he regularly gives presentations at education conferences about inclusive physical education practice. When asked about the origins of the program, he always credits David. "He taught me more in one moment of defiance than I learned in years of professional development," he often says. "He reminded me why I wanted to become a PE teacher in the first place. Not to train elite athletes, but to help every child discover the joy of movement and the power of teamwork." The photograph in the trophy case has faded slightly over the years. Some of the faces are no longer immediately recognizable to current students, but the story behind it remains vivid in the school's collective memory, a testament to the fact that meaningful change doesn't always come from those with official power or authority. Sometimes it comes from the most unexpected sources, from those who have been pushed to the margins, whose quiet suffering eventually finds expression in a moment of transformative courage. David Parker was always the last one picked for team, until the day he chose himself, chose to stand up for what was right, chose to challenge a system that had caused him and countless others needless pain. In doing so, he didn't just change a gym class or a school policy. He changed the way an entire community thought about inclusion, fairness, and the true purpose of education. And that, perhaps, is the most important lesson his story has to teach us all, that no voice is too small to matter, no person too insignificant to make a difference, and no unjust system too entrenched to be changed by someone with the courage to take that first, trembling step towards something better. If this story touched you, take a deep breath and think about the people in your life who might be feeling invisible right now. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply acknowledge someone's presence, validate their worth, and stand beside them when they're standing alone. Remember that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about acting despite your fear. It's about recognizing when something isn't right and taking that first step, even when your voice shakes and your knees feel weak. And most importantly, It's about understanding that the most meaningful changes often begin with the smallest acts of courage. A quiet no to what has always been accepted, a simple act of solidarity with someone who has been excluded, a moment of standing up when it would be easier to remain seated. Like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe to never miss more stories of hidden courage and unexpected transformation. Comment below about a time when you witnessed or experienced a small act that made a big difference. And share this with someone who might need to be reminded of the power of their own voice, no matter how quiet it might seem. Because in the end, it's not the loudest voices that change the world. It's the most persistent ones. The ones that continue to speak truth even when no one seems to be listening. The ones that believe, despite all evidence to the contrary, that a better world is possible if we have the courage to create it together.